this national debt at $40 trillion is really becoming a national security concern. You talk to some of our military leaders in the past talking about it that way, and clearly the world is more dangerous now than it has ever been in many of our lifetimes. And so getting to this place where now we have all this money being diverted away from things that could be used to help us protect American citizens from threats abroad and domestic with homeland security needs and all the rest, this is a real issue. And so Indiana then passed unanimously, by the way, all Republicans, all Democrats who were voting that day passed the ALEC model resolution calling the national debt a national security concern. And so we are now seeing states around the country introduce that, and we hope to see much more attention brought to that issue as a result.
We're here at ALEC's 53rd annual meeting in Orlando, Florida. We've had a great time so far, and we're talking with Jonathan Williams, ALEC's president and chief economist. Jonathan, thank you for being with us on ALEC TV.
Absolutely, Joel.
We've had a lot of great wins this year in the states on the economic front. One of those big wins is a number of states moving toward a flat tax or lowering taxes or even eliminating the personal income tax. Talk to us about what that means for those states.
Well, I mean, it's a game changer for the states. I mean, it is an incredible opportunity to remake the economic outlook of the states. And when folks are out there cutting taxes year after year, following the principles in rich states, poor states that ALEC has been out talking about for now nearly 20 years, we've seen more momentum coming out of the pandemic than any other time in the last several decades on tax cuts. And we're not talking about tiny little tax cuts. You've heard me talk about it a ton around the office even, but I mean, we're talking about really monumental changes in the way that states go about taxing, whether that's going from a progressive tax structure which penalizes people the more successful they are and more they have jobs in a state, to going to a flat tax. That's a huge switch in the right direction. We've seen something like a dozen states coming out of the pandemic that have become flat tax states, including your home state in Louisiana.
Right.
And then we've seen now states look to eliminate income taxes altogether. I talked a little bit about it with Senator Graham on the main stage the other day, but all the movement in Oklahoma and Mississippi just last session to vote to phase out their personal income tax over time with triggers. And then just a couple of weeks ago, our friends in South Carolina did the exact same thing. And so we have 8 states in America that do not tax personal income. As we found in our research, it's one of the very best things that you can do for economic development, job creation, population growth. And these states want to be more like Florida and Texas and less like New York and California. And if you had to summarize rich states, poor states in a nutshell, that's what it is.
Well, if you look at rich states, poor states, the top states have no personal income tax or are flattened. Utah is #1 for 19 years and counting.
Yes.
No personal income tax. Tennessee #2, no personal income tax. Florida #10, no personal income tax. And Oklahoma is trying to move to no personal income tax as well. Governor Stitt talked about that here this morning. Something else he talked about, though, was the national debt and the danger that poses to national security. Talk to us about what states like Indiana are doing on that front.
Well, it's been a huge concern for us at ALEC and our members for a long time. And, I remember raising the concern during the bailout of the states discussion in the Obama era. And the national debt at that time, you know what it was?
What was it?
It was about $9 trillion.
Wow.
And here we are at nearly $40 trillion now of national debt, where the interest costs every year, the amount that we pay and get nothing for except pay down interest like an interest-only mortgage, as Governor Stitt talked about earlier, is $1 trillion a year. More than our national defense spending. That's incredible. Something needs to be done about that. And not incredible in a good way, of course. So Comptroller Elise Mishala from Indiana came to us last year, right before our Indianapolis annual meeting, with a fantastic idea of something that Indiana had started to work on, which says, really, federal government, get your house in order. And states need to start taking more of a leadership position on this to say this is not only a concern of fiscal responsibility, this national debt at $40 trillion is really becoming a national security concern. You talk to some of our military leaders in the past talking about it that way, and clearly the world is more dangerous now than it has ever been in many of our lifetimes. And so getting to this place where now we have all this money being diverted away from things that could be used to help us protect American citizens from threats abroad and domestic with homeland security needs and all the rest, this is a real issue. And so Indiana then passed unanimously, by the way, all Republicans, all Democrats who were voting that day passed the ALEC model resolution calling the national debt a national security concern. And so we are now seeing states around the country introduce that, and we hope to see much more attention brought to that issue as a result.
Good, and you worked with the comptroller in Indiana on an op-ed in the Hill also not long ago, and we'd love for folks to check that out because it talks about the importance of what states can do to help alleviate what's going on in Washington on the national debt. But speaking of Washington, ALEC has been a big player in some of the major economic legislation that has come out of Washington recently. There was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act a few years ago, but last year we're past the one-year anniversary now of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which does a number of great things on the personal tax front, on the corporate tax front, on education freedom. Talk to us about what that bill means for folks across the country and for the state specifically.
Well, I'll tell you, we have a real ALEC hero at Ways and Means Committee Chairman Jason Smith, who really was very involved in our ALEC process when he was a state legislator not that many years ago. He's our ALEC state chair in Missouri. He was a member of the Tax and Fiscal Policy Task Force. And here he is with the gavel as the person who's really crafting this legislation. Because you remember, all pieces of tax legislation under the Constitution must originate in the U.S. House. So he was the key player in all this, which was awesome. But you start with that, and you look at the issues. And ALEC was so involved in this from the very start. We had a legislator letter that we had more than 600 legislators from around the country. I think 48 states represented, talking about the benefits and the need to restore the Trump tax cuts from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which people forget they were scheduled to expire fully in many cases here just in the last year. And so if nothing was done, it would have been the largest tax increase in American history. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Cooler heads prevailed. People like Chairman Smith, Speaker Johnson, another ALEC alum of 100 plus ALEC alums, 114 in the current Congress when they served in the states, and they dealt with things like taxes. They dealt with things like, you mentioned, education freedom. That's something that didn't get nearly enough attention as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill or the Working Families Tax Cut Act. And it was the first federal tax credit scholarship program for education freedom, $1,700 per year to send kids to schools of parents' choice. And that's an amazing new opportunity for states that otherwise have not passed things like our ALEC model policy on universal education choice. So you have those things. You have the doubling of the popular 529 savings plans for K-12 expenses. That's a massive benefit in the One Big Beautiful Bill. And the other thing I'll mention on it, which we've done a ton of work with our ALEC Government Efficiency Coalition, were the elements to stop waste, fraud, and abuse. It's something that Dr. Oz talked about extensively during his keynote yesterday. And ALEC, as he mentioned, has been a huge partner to these efforts to the Trump administration to root out waste, fraud, and abuse through our work at the state level. But things like work requirements, basic things, things like getting SNAP error rates down, or states having to pay a penalty if they can't get their own fiscal houses and books in order. Common sense stuff, but stuff that oftentimes doesn't get enough attention.
And that One Big Beautiful Bill Act and some of the other economic legislation that's passed recently has really done a great job on the economy. Job numbers, hundreds of thousands of jobs created this year alone. GDP growth up, the economic growth is up. Fraud, waste, and abuse being rooted out all across government. Record tax returns this year. I think it was 10% more for folks across the country this year than last year. And that's partly because of what ALEC has been trying to do in the states, but also to try and get that federal legislation passed. You also mentioned the education freedom part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. 30 states now have implemented that tax credit, red and blue states.
That's I think the important point is Jared Polis, Democrat governor of Colorado, who's spoken at ALEC annual meetings before. He was one of the first out of the gate to say, opt me in because it's the right thing to do for Colorado and our families. Even recently, you probably have seen this. I mean, Governor Kathy Hochul of New York, not a conservative Democrat by any stretch of the imagination, has at least said, I want to pursue this as well. So if people like that are talking about it, this should be all the above 50 state solution for governors or legislators in some cases to opt in if their governors aren't willing to do so. But there's just so much there, and you rattled off some really good, impressive statistics on the economy. Really resilient economy this far into an expansion cycle. When you look at the history of kind of the boom-bust business cycles, we're a long ways into this run, into the fact that we're still seeing numbers that strong, I think is in good part between waste, fraud, and abuse reduction, and then also just the tax rate reduction in the pro-growth tax policy. The last thing I'll mention is, for the first time in my professional life, we have a permanent tax code after the one big beautiful bill. We have all these weird rules in the U.S. Senate with phase outs and things because of the filibuster and the bird bath, as they call it. And so different types of things are phased out. And so when people don't have certainty, or businesses don't have certainty, especially to say the tax rules are going to change 2 or 3, 5 years down the road, they're not going to be sitting on huge investments. That money's going to sit on the sideline. But after the one big beautiful bill, the working families tax cut, we have a permanent tax code that's not going to phase out, and that's an incredible benefit.
And you mentioned the letter that over 600 legislators from 48 states signed in support of this legislation. Talk to me about the importance of what ALEC does on a day-to-day basis. We're here in Orlando. We had a record number of attendees this year, an incredible number. Talk to us about why annual meetings like this matter, but also these academies that we hold throughout the year across the country, the States and Nation Policy Summit, those things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Why are those important, and why should folks join ALEC to take part in those?
Well, I mean, annual meeting and our States and Nations Policy Summit coming up in December in Washington, I mean, for me, and I hear it all the time from legislators, I mean, it's a patriotic shot of adrenaline to get everybody who believe in these freedom principles of limited government, federalism, free markets, the 3 ALEC guiding principles, coming together under one roof to talk about best practices. And of course, getting into a little bit of nitty-gritty sometimes on the debate in the task forces and model policy and amendments, and but at the end of the day, the big picture is when we leave an annual meeting, our legislators and our partners and friends all across the country are more empowered than ever to go out and pursue this agenda that will be bringing more freedom to Americans across the board. And that's an incredible opportunity, and people are charged up and ready to go. The academies are also awesome opportunities, small group gatherings, 20 legislators for 2.5 days to really go deep dive in a particular issue set to say, if I want to become more knowledgeable, or if I want to share my knowledge with other colleagues on a particular issue set, let's do it for 2.5 days, and it's an incredible opportunity.
Well, we encourage you folks out there to look at ALEC.org. Join if you're not a member of ALEC already. We are here in Orlando at ALEC's 53rd annual meeting. We're talking with Jonathan Williams. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you.